The
Jenn
whole
Blanchet,
world.
welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Hi. I'm like
Hi.
waving. It doesn't matter. You can't see the
It
wave.
really doesn't. They can't see you. But for anybody who's listening, Jenn is joining me from Sudbury, Ontario, Canada. And that is actually my hometown. I'm actually from Chelmsford. So,
Chelmsford.
Chelmsford. And Jenn, like myself, is Franco-Ontarian, so bilingue, français-anglais, as we would say, but we're going to proceed in English since this is an English show.
Yeah. I'm sorry if I do speak French throughout. I promise to translate.
Or I'll translate and I may not be accurate. So Jenn is here because she is or has been a science communicator with Science North, which is like the science capital of, I'd like to say Canada, but really of Northern Ontario.
Yeah. We can't dismiss that there are other science centers. I do not want, it's not a competition. But yes, in my opinion, the Blue Coats are the best. I can say that because I truly believe it. But yeah.
Actually, for people who are listening, in Arizona or Germany, for example, they have no idea what Science North is. So, how would you describe it?
An amazing place. Okay, well, that like everyone says that about their museum, I guess. Well, so Science North is a science museum, and I hate using the word museum because usually when we think about museums, we think like I walk in, I look at things, and that's it. Well, at Science North, what's really interesting is there's a lot of hands-on components to it. Yes, there are parts where you read, but we try to make sure that it's very minimal, right? Like that the reading is, because a lot of times when you're learning science, you learn better from hands-on learning, right? We all remember as students learning science through high school and stuff, you remember those classes where your teacher is like exploding stuff for you, right? You may not remember exactly what they were lighting on fire, but you do remember that experiment or that feeling, that emotion happening while you're kind of doing that. The other thing that's really great about Science North is that they have what we call blue coats. Now, I'm not just talking about like people wearing a blue coat and not the history type blue coat type thing, but it's a bunch of people who are passionate of science or about science that can walk around and you can ask them questions and they show you demonstrations and they can talk to you about anything under the sun and I or even above the sun. Like, so it's a bunch of knowledgeable people, some people with their PhDs, their doctorates, their master's degrees in engineering to computer sciences to chemistry to biophysics to like name it. There's somebody in the Science Center that has studied it. So it's really kind of interesting. And there's also people, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, that are passionate about science like myself, who don't necessarily have a degree in it, but like a paper degree, but could have a degree because of everything they've researched and everything that they've been doing, right? So yeah, so that's Science North in a nutshell. There's also animals. So like we can't forget about our beautiful, like now I'm going to forget the word because it's me, our ambassadors, our animal ambassadors at Science North that are also a huge part of the Science Center. So we get to talk about Canadian animals, right? So if you come here and you're like, I've never seen a beaver before, or I've never seen a porcupine before, you can actually come and visit these animals. Like it's really, really interesting. That's a really kind of exceptional part of Science North in comparison to some other museums or science centers.
Yeah, I was really privileged to have grown up in Chelmsford because we would take the bus every year as a school trip to Science North, and we would, visit all the different floors. And what's unique about Science North is that there is a cave, an adjacent cave, where you walk through the earth pretty much. It's really, really different. It's very unique. And I mean, I'm really curious. You mentioned the animals, and I remember very vividly Ralph, I think it was Ralph the beaver at the time.
Ralph was the porcupine.
Oh, porcupine. That's right. And then there were flying squirrels. Do they still do the squirrels?
Yeah. There's still the flying squirrels. So you get to learn about the patagium, so the skin that's like helps them glide, and why they're called flying squirrels, but they should be called gliding squirrels. Like you learn so much without even realizing. Like I didn't even work when I was at Science North. I didn't even work on the animal floor, and I know all this stuff. One, because I am nosy, but also like you just end up picking up all this information just if you ask the right questions. And I think that's kind of a really fun thing about Science North, is because you can stop and ask anybody questions and they'll find the right person to answer that question for you. So you get that direct impact of, well, science, really. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's really unique, and that's why I really wanted to talk about Science North for a few minutes here because I visited all sorts of science centers. Wherever I travel, I try to hit up the science museums or the science centers. I remember going to the one in Montreal. There's a science center in the Old Port, and there was literally nobody there. There was
Yeah.
like computers and various structures and whatever sciencey things, but there was nobody there to actually talk to. So that's a very unique offering.
Yeah, and it's wonderful. Like, it's super, even for myself as somebody who worked at Science North as a science communicator, it was really fun to be able to walk up to somebody with questions that I had or questions that I didn't understand. Like, if you're researching, sometimes it's like really awesome to be able to talk to somebody and go, "Hey, what do you think about this?" Or is this how I'm reading it? Is this correct? And being able to actually go to somebody and have a contact with an actual scientist or somebody who has learned science. Like, it's exceptional. Or questions about, like, hey, why is that animal doing that? Or why is, like, why do you say that, for example, men can jump higher than women? Or why is it that, like, you're talking about center of gravity, but, like, why are we not talking about center of mass? Or, like, all of this stuff is accessible. And to me, that's like the most exciting thing about Science North. And I think that's what kind of pushed my interest. And not that I didn't have interest before, but pushed that interest in science, is to understand that my way of seeing science is accepted, right? Like, so my way of understanding that science isn't just for a select few who have gone to school, but is accessible to everyone. Like, everyone can have this, everyone can learn this. And if, trust me, if I can learn it, anyone can. Like, there's
Well, and this is what's really unique here. Okay, let's get into your background because I'm really hoping that a lot of science communicators are going to listen to this episode. And the thing that's very unique about you is that you have a theater background. And
yes.
actually, this is how I learned about you. I think I first heard about you through a play that I went to see with Myriam Cusson and Sandrine
Yeah.
Lafont and a whole bunch of people that, I already knew in Ottawa and Montreal. So,
Yeah.
how did you go from being a theater artist into science communication? Tell me about that story.
Okay, so one Monday afternoon, it was bright and sunny. Could you imagine if that's actually how it started? So really, it stems from, like, even when I was younger. Like, I remember being a kid and begging my parents. This is how it started in my brain. It's like way before even being an actor or stage manager or that. I remember being a kid and begging my parents for those glow in the dark stars, like
Oh
those.
my god, me too.
Right? Okay, so,
Yeah.
and I remember sitting there and spending weeks trying to figure out how to place them correctly and the measurements on how to place them, like, on my
Yes.
ceiling, so that they look like
The constellations.
thank you, the
Right.
constellations, right? Like, and just being so, like, and my sister, when she, and if she listens to this, my sister was so obsessed with Backstreet Boys, and on her side, she had the Backstreet Boys posters, and on my side, I had these stars that were so, like, as an adult looking back on it, I'm like, they were so not placed correctly, but um which, that's one thing I learned at Science North. But yeah, just starting there, having this idea that one day I could go to the moon. Like, one day, the possibility of me making it there, it could, like, that could happen. So I read everything that I could possibly read about the stars and the planets and how they are aligned, and how long it would take me to get to the moon, and how long, so on and so forth. And then, like, getting older, I started realizing that I happen to be a person that has this, like, though I'm an introvert, like, I really love my books and my, like closing myself down and having, like, the blinders on, I do have an extroverted energy. So I do have a way of explaining things to people and for them to understand. So I thought that the best place for me would be to go into acting and becoming an actor. And then I got to university after applying and doing auditions and things like that. Got into Laurentian University for their theater program, Art d'Expression, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. But going there and then realizing that I really loved the backstage part of everything. So the organizing, the data entry, like all of that kind of fun stuff, budgeting and all of that. And then I graduated from that program, worked in film and television. So as you can tell, I'm a person that has always wanted to learn something new. Like, not that I've ever not been able to hold a job, but I wanted to know more. I keep wanting to know more. Like, what would it be like to work at a Tim Hortons? What would it be like to work at a bus depot? What is it? What would it like? Keep learning things to keep myself challenged. So I always loved research, always loved learning, always loved understanding the way the world works around me, right? Like understanding all of that. So then I went to school to be a teacher. So did that. And then I applied to work at Science North because there was a job opening in the Discovery Theater. So the Discovery Theater, for those who don't know, at Science North, is a kind of a really fun area in the Science Center. It's actually considered, and I consider it, because I mean, I'm self-centered, but it's the heart of the Science Center. It's the place where you get to light things on fire. You get to blow things up legit. And I got to start doing those presentations and doing all the research to explain in, I don't want to say layman's term, because a lot of times when we say that, we think of it as dumbed down, but it's not dumbed down. It's just more accessible for your audience, because your audience could be anywhere from kindergarten to, well, adulthood, right? Like, so I like 70, 80 years old, and you're trying to teach them in a way that doesn't make anybody feel like you're saying, hey, well, you don't know this, right? So that's how I, like, my progress, like it always made sense in a way, but as John Turner would say, which you know John Turner as well, would say, it's a gift from the gods. Like, things seem to have just fallen into place, and I learned so much about myself and the things that I enjoyed by going through this progress, and knowing that for me, one of the important things is learning how to teach science so that kids don't think that they can't do it. You know, like, yeah, like,
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, and again, just to be clear for everybody, you don't have a PhD in science. You don't even have a
ew,
degree in science.
ew.
You literally took on a job. You are a qualified teacher, but you literally took on a job to teach science to the general public. And in a way that is almost controversial
Yes, yeah.
for the science communication industry, let's call it. Have you gotten any flack from scientists?
Yes, you guys can't see it right now, but I am nodding my head even. Yeah, I did, but I'm a pretty vocal person when it comes to biases in that sense, right? Like, but yeah, I got people telling me, well, you know, maybe you should get your supervisor to look over that script, because you know you don't have a science background, or you know you're not going to get anywhere with this because you don't have a science background. And I kept going, well, what is a science background? Like, and there, one of my coworkers actually kind of said it in a really great way. He said, well, he has his master's in, oh my gosh, Tyler, if you're listening to this, I apologize, but he has his master's in astro something with the stars, okay?
Yeah.
And he explained it like this. He said, if everyone was a scientist, so imagine for a moment, and this is not like to negate anything. This is not to say that this isn't okay, but everyone in science specializes in something, right? Because there's so much out there that you don't have a choice but to pick or choose kind of your specialized area. Everyone is specializing. He says, if everyone does that, then no one understands each other. And I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean? But he says, so think of it this way. He says, you need people that aren't specialized in it to go, okay, wait, hold up a second. What are you saying? What is the importance of the message that you're giving me? Like, just simple things, right? Like, I remember talking about static electricity and trying to understand better, because I didn't realize, to me, static electricity was something that we all understand because we all, well, have felt it at some point in time. But then understanding that there's more to it than that, that the electrons and the protons and the neutrons, and if you have an isolator, and if you like all of this other stuff. And I'm like, hey, hold on, Tyler, like, hold on, like, what are you trying to get me to understand? He's like, well, there's positive and negative, and when they meet, they like, I was like, okay, that's what we need. Like, that's kind of the point of it, right? So like a lot of times I would get people telling me like, oh, are you sure that's what it is? And I'm like, yeah, I'm 100% sure. Like I remember a conversation with my supervisor, and we're sitting there, and I was explaining to her that as you age, this is we were doing hearing tests, we were talking about sound vibrations and how as an adult, like, so between certain ages you hear really well, and then you get older at around, I can't remember if it was 32 now or 34, but there's a certain age where your ears start actually deteriorating, so your ears can no longer hear what they used to hear when you were younger. And she turns to me and she says, that's not true. And I go, yeah, it is. And she says, and she's a person that has degrees in other things, right? So and I'm like, yeah, no, search it up. She went and looked it up, and I was right. And she's like, I'm so sorry. But like a lot of times people don't seem to think that just because you don't have that paper doesn't mean that you can't have a passion for the science. Like learning all this stuff and understanding the importance of reading proper documents, or reading documents that like people aren't faking, right? So all the scientific journals, and understanding what they're saying in there does take a kind of, in my opinion, a creative person to understand it, to bring it to the public's eye. And that's where the science communication comes in handy, right? Is I am your general public. So for me to be able to bring it through my brain and shoot it out in a creative fashion is more useful than somebody who has a, maybe not always more useful, like I feel like stipulation at the bottom of the screen, but like in cases like at Science North, right? Like or explaining science even in the classroom is just teaching like, okay, but this is what he's saying, and not using these big words that mean or and are important. And if you are studying that, 100% important, but when you're teaching it to general public, it's not, you're putting it in my head and it's going out like that, right? Like, so I find that to me, as an artist, as somebody, like that's what we do, right? Like when I'm writing a play, when I am acting in a play, my whole purpose is to be able to give the message to my audience. So for me, having a background in science isn't a necessary for teaching science and for passing science along. Like I also think that, like if you see me in person, and maybe in my pictures you can see that too, but I am a person who enjoys dyeing my hair all fun colors, and I find that that's another way to make science accessible. Like I remember thinking or getting a comment on one of my videos that I do with Science North, and them saying, wow, you've made science not acceptable, but accessible because of the way that you look. Because a lot of times we assume that scientists, we all have the image of Albert Einstein, right? Like we all think like, oh, it's an old man with glasses and a beard. Like that's a scientist. Like, okay. And then there's people, well, like yourself and me, who come along who have either no hair or some hair or colored hair or like piercings and tattoos. And we come in and we're like, yo man, check out the science. Like, did you know that methane can do this? Like, right? Like there's that joy in it, that oh right, like if that chick can do it, I can too.
Absolutely, 100% on that. And, I just want to touch on something that you just said, which is, the what happens sometimes, and this actually happened to me during an interview with a marine biologist, and we laughed about it afterwards. But at one point, she said, we were talking about sea sponges.
Right.
And
Yeah.
at one point she said something like, "Oh yeah, and a sponge is an animal and blah blah blah." And then I was like, well, "Hold up. What do you mean? Hold up. A
Yeah.
sponge is an animal?" And then it clicked, it dawned on her that I didn't know that.
Right. Yeah. Like,
You know?
and it's silly things. So like with Science North, I was able to do Jenn Learns Stuff. And that, like my all-time favorite thing that I got to do with Science North, where I got to ask questions. And that's one of my first questions was along the same lines as that, is I had been reading a book, Turtles All the Way Down by John Green or Hank Green, one of the Green brothers. And in it, he talks about the two main characters are sitting and looking at the stars, and the one character is telling the other that, well, what's really interesting is when we're looking at the constellations, to understand that the stars aren't next to each other. Okay. And I was like, hold up, wait a minute. And I had to reread that paragraph because I was like, wait a second, because my whole life, and this is even like when I was a kid putting the stickers on my ceiling, a constellation, because we were always taught in school that they're like connect the dots. So when we think about connect the dots, we think about them on a page, right? Like, and you're connecting one to one, so it's on like flat surface, like a not even a two-dimensional, like one dimensional, like you're like beep, beep, and then you're adding them together. To realize, and like it still blows my mind that the stars in a constellation can be further apart than the first star in the constellation and Earth. So, like,
That's
what?
massive. That's
Like,
huge.
how do we add that together and say, yeah, that's a picture? Like, and it was just insane in my brain. And talking with the person, so Tyler, who did that video with me, like that episode, was just like, you didn't know that? And I was like, no, like, no idea. And I mean, I go out and I look at the stars and I can tell you about the aurora borealis and I can talk to you about all of this fun stuff, but to I didn't know. Like,
You bring up a very good point, and this is something that you and I can both personally and professionally relate to, which is that we are not academics going into science communication. We are artists going into science communication. And so now I'm really curious because I've got both feet in the science communication world. You know, I've been to science communication conferences. I've
mm,
also experienced the pushback from
yeah,
academics, so I know what it's like to be told you shouldn't be doing this unless you have a PhD.
yeah.
That being said, do you think that the science community should be exploring more relationships with artists?
Yes, 100%. I didn't even have to wait to answer that. Did you see that? How quickly I answered that?
Yep.
I remember being in university, and this is like, and I'm sure a lot of my colleagues who I've worked with in the past years remember this too, or like people that were in my class, but I remember learning about think tanks. And I remember learning about how you would put a whole bunch of people together that don't necessarily have the same backgrounds, right? You put them together in a room and you get them to resolve a problem. And like 9 times out of 10, what happens in the think tank is the artist in the room is the one that finds the answer. And the reason being is because that person has been trained to think outside the box, right? So in science, which is totally understandable, is that there's protocols to follow. Like, so when you're doing experiments and things like that, right, you can't just, I have to put on my PPE, I have to make sure that I'm not adding my personal bacteria to whatever growth I am trying to grow, or like in my petri dish or things like that. And, no one's allowed to eat the agar and like stuff like that. So you understand that there's a train, like a way of thinking, like it's a process, and you've been learning it from university all the way to wherever you are now, right? Like, whereas an artist, the way that we perceive the world is like it's a tidbit. We are like, our world is not just one linear line. Our world is kind of more chaotic. So when you give me 30 things and you're like, find the common denominator in all this, find what's similar, I can go and say, this is what it is, and that's our resolve, because my brain is working on making that comparison or making that link between what you're saying, what's being said over here, and how it can work together in the real world, right? Like, so because artists get we read so much, we try to feed ourselves the knowledge that we may not necessarily have because we've gone to school. We try to feed ourselves with everything because we can't just be a one trick pony, right? As an actor, if you're an actor that hasn't studied who your character is, then you're not a real actor. like and sorry to actors out there who don't do that, but it's true. Like, if you are playing a lawyer and you don't know like what lawyers do, you got a problem. So it's the same thing in think tanks and stuff, right? Like, I have done that research, and I'm listening to you say this, and like I'm processing it differently because I don't have that linear thought process. I don't have that A plus B equals C. To me, I can go to A to Z to Y because I don't have a reason for not doing that. So I'm going to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're not the only ones. I mean, there's Ariel Wadman, who is a grad school art student who now, like, I think works for NASA, or she's like just a big name in the science communication industry. Um, so I know that, there are now grad programs in science communication. Laurentian University, I think, is one of them. I think they have a master's of
Yeah.
Scicomm. Um, I don't know what their criteria are. I don't know if you have to have a science degree to get in. I have no idea, but I am curious to know if, I'm starting to really wonder again along these lines, should um, masters or sorry, should Scicomm is a short term, by the way, guys, for science communication, but should those grad programs be recruiting from art schools and from arts programs as much as they are from science programs?
I believe so. I believe so. I do think that if, mind you, like this is tough because on the same token, like we are a special breed as artists too, right? Like some artists aren't interested in all of this stuff, and that's completely fine. Or interested in teaching the science, but just learning it enough to get that role or to get that character down right, and that's totally fine. But yeah, I do think that an interview process might be worth it, instead of just going and seeing your credentials. But I believe that with any other employment, to be quite frank, I don't think that what you write down on paper is necessarily a testament to who you are and what you've done, like it's so hard. It's so hard, but I do think I know that I have contemplated even going into the science communication program at Laurentian because it partners with Science North as well. So there's a lot of fun stuff going on there. Yeah, so I agree, and I'm also like on the other side of the fence at the same time because
Yeah.
it could potentially be hard for certain people who don't like to read journals. Like, I
Yeah,
don't.
I guess it depends too on the focus of the program.
Yeah,
I know that there are a lot of science communication programs right now, and this is a comment that or a conversation I've had with people in the community who have said, Julie, like, I know you have high expectations of us, but we're only really at the point of being able to communicate with each other as
yeah,
scientists. We're not even there yet in terms of how to market our research, how to market the communications, how to get on YouTube. As you know, I'm a Twitch streamer and I do science on Twitch. And when I first started, Jen, there were like maybe 4 or 5 of us, and now there's probably at least 300.
oh yeah.
So it is
I
growing.
I watch. It is like the coolest thing. Well, yeah, like tardigrades. Okay, stop. Like, shut up.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, but yeah, I mean, you have experience with this too, with this
Yeah.
whole Jenn Learns stuff.
Oh, I
Let's
love it.
talk about that for a minute because that is, I almost wish I could do the marketing for that show just because it is so good and I want it
Wow.
more
Yeah.
out there.
I'll
Um,
I'll we'll talk later. My people will call your people. Like,
no, but it's so good. I mean,
yeah.
and so who came up with that idea and who writes it?
Uh Okay, so me, but I can't take full credit. Okay, so here's how it happened. It was kind of a funny situation. We were sitting at a table, we were shooting out ideas for things, and because I'm a ridiculous person and I think that everything should be a comedic act, I turned and I said, huh, why don't we do a show called Jenn Learns Stuff where I go around and learn stuff? Haha. Thinking that I was funny. And one of the people from the marketing team at Science North was like writing it down. And I was like, okay, hold on a second. And then somebody else was like, oh, well, it should be called Jenn Learns Science. And then I was like, well, no, like, if this is going to be a thing, I can't call it Jenn Learns Science. And I'm sure other people in the science community understand this. Like, I can't call it that. And the reason being is because the minute that you call anything science for anybody that isn't interested in science, that's it. That's done. It's too tough for them. It's like when you yell out, I love math. About 90 people in the room are going to be like, I'm out. Like, so the same reason, like I was like, I can't use that word, unfortunately. Like, I really want to, but it also opens up a lot of doors. Like, it opens up to show you that everything in my opinion, is science. Like the way you throw a ball can be science. The way the ball mushes, like all of this is science. So you can always bring it back to science. But yeah, so I made a stupid joke, and my colleague Renata was like, "Yeah, we got to do that." Who Renata is a student from the science program, the science communication program. She's from Brazil originally, came here for that, and is now working at Science North. So her and I work on that, and I write up the script. I get her to check it over just to make sure that one, she understands it, and I understand what I'm saying, and we make sure that the science is correct in it together that way. But I definitely do a lot of the research, and then she does all the production side of it. So the filming, the making sure that I sound okay, because I do have an extremely loud voice. So like microphones and things like that, and making sure the person I'm talking with. So I contact people to say like, hey, would you want to like mess around with me and teach me this subject? So I write the whole script, pass it on to the person that I'm talking with so that they can see what we're talking about. Because as working at Science North, one of the issues was no one has a lot of time because there's a lot of stuff that has to be done, and your public is your more important thing. So like you can't film during work hours. And anyway, long story short, we write the scripts, the person comes in, we take maybe 2-3 hours to film. She does all the editing, and then it's up on our social medias of Science North. Yeah. So a lot of work, but a lot of fun work. Like I have learned so much stuff. And the greatest part, I think, to me about it is being able to tell adults that they can ask questions. Like, I think at a certain age, people forget that just because you're like in your late 30s or even your early 30s, that you have to stop asking questions, like that you have to get your kids to ask the questions because you don't want to seem like you don't know stuff. So I think a lot of times what happens is they see me asking questions and they become less afraid of asking those questions. And like, a lot of the questions I ask are ridiculous. Like, I can't even remember half of them. Like,
Look at your allergy one,
right.
the seasonal allergy one. You're like, what's a seasonal allergy?
Right. Like, and I know because I suffer from it. So like, which is funny in that one, because I say that do I say that I do? Yeah, I do. And my siblings don't, but like we all do. Like, so there's like, sometimes you're just creating a story so that you get your message across too, right? But like so much fun, so much ridiculousness, and so much like, I loved filming the magnet one, like where we're like out front Science North. And that one was hilarious because at one point in time, Renata, the camera person, so like my colleague, is like trying to get this really awesome shot. And I'm like, and then I scream because she looks like she's about to fall off a cliff there. And we're like, just the ridiculousness of it all. And then enjoying, because Renata's background isn't in like, I don't want to say general science because she has a really amazing background in, I can't even pronounce the science. I apologize, but she knows how animals run. So for her to learn as well with me is so much fun. Like, and coming from like, unfortunately, due to the pandemic and stuff, we were supposed to do an episode on why the leaves change color. We were supposed to also do an episode on snowflakes, because these are things that for her, she was like, when she came to Canada, like, this is so weird. This is so, yes, colors change, but not like this, like not in. And me, on the other hand, is like, I've only ever lived in Canada. So to not understand how she didn't understand that this happened, and not to understand, because I'm like, in other countries leaves change, Renata, like, she's like, no, but not like this. And then learning about all of the different chemicals that are in trees that make them change that color, and how in different areas it changes difference because of the temperatures, right? So like, it's really interesting to go through all of this with another colleague who does have a background in science but still doesn't know everything, right? Like, so there's kind of that joy of being able to, as somebody who doesn't have a science background, and being like, hey, Renata, did you know that iron filings, like, and what you can do with them? And she's like, what?
I mean,
Right.
essentially, you're getting paid to nerd out.
Oh my gosh. And
right?
Sorry, that was really loud and I could tell,
No,
but like,
that's the best part.
yeah, it's totally, to me, the best part of Jenn Learns Stuff is the fact that like, I get paid, yes, to do my job, but like, hold on, you're telling me that my job is to learn stuff? Like, and my job is to to teach other people to learn stuff. Hold on, wait a minute. Like, and you're telling me that I can light things on fire at the same time? Like, what's going on? Like, this is so crazy. This is so like.
But I mean, it's like somebody who works on Mythbusters, or like all those cool TV shows. And I'm just curious, like if somebody like Netflix came to you and said, "Hey, would you like to host a science show?" Would you say yes?
Yeah, so Netflix, if you're out there, yes, 100%. And I do think it's wonderful. Like, I mean, now what's interesting is that platform TikTok. I'm not sure if you know
Mhm.
it, right?
Of
And
course, I have
following,
tardigrades on there.
right? Yeah. So following all the science community on TikTok and seeing the wonderful science communication that's happening there. Whereas, like, I remember talking about this at Science North, and there's still that kind of I don't want to call it a backlash, but that reticence, like that holding back of like, oh, we shouldn't go on that platform. We shouldn't go on that platform, and going, but why? Isn't our mandate as science communicators to teach the science on any way possible? Like, is that not what we're supposed to be doing? And not quite understand. I mean, I understand there's like other social implications and things like that, like putting yourself out there. But on the same token, that's what's in with the teenagers, and I'm sure that other scientists out there and other science communicators know that, like, that's your group that just doesn't want to do anything. Like, so to get them, watching them as a teacher now doing TikToks during like their lunch period and stuff like that, and the weird whatever dances, and watching them do that type of stuff, I go like, well, couldn't we use that to also, I don't know, make a tardigrade do a TikTok dance? Like, I know that that's not possible because you can't like force their legs into stuff, but like, but you know
Yeah,
what
but
I
you
mean?
could
Like,
animate them. You could animate them. I
yeah,
mean, you're right. The point you're trying to make here is that we should be using channels that are accessible to especially to the audience. That's one of the things, and I don't know if you agree or disagree with me, but I find that one of the ways that science communication could improve is in audience targeting.
yeah, yeah. And it's difficult. Like, it's difficult, I find now, because a lot of times people, when you're asking them for information, they think that you're asking it for, like, I'm going to send you ads, which I guess they're not technically wrong. But like, for myself, like, I wish I could have a better interaction with Jenn Learns Stuff, like, I wish that I could have a way to communicate with them. And like, I don't know if it's one of those, like what we're doing now, like having a moment where we just sit down and chat with some random people who have questions, and I go, oh yeah, that's a cool question, and I'll find somebody, like, um mostly because I like
I
to
mean, it's
learn.
really go on Twitch, right?
Yeah,
And this is why I've been spreading the word around to people who have been wanting to do science communication. I'm like, yo, join Twitch. It's great because you get to reach the 5-year-old and the 85-year-old
yeah.
at the same time,
Yeah, and right
which
now with the
is
pandemic
incredible.
too, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's the other thing, is I go, like, Science North does have a really amazing platform, in the sense that, like, so right now Science North is doing a lot of online learning programs for teachers, and they can access it through their website and stuff like that. But I'm like, imagine if Science North right now was on Twitch and we were doing live shows from the Discovery Theater, and people will comment, and I'm sure you and I can agree on this, but like, they get, well, why don't we just record it? And I'm like, because you lose that ephemeral, that feeling of disappearing after, right? Like, you are there in the moment and it's gone after. So in my mind, I'm like, no, but that's what part of that fun of science is, or part of that getting you to be intrigued about science, right? Is the idea that when I do a show in disco, you may only remember the fact that I lit propane on fire using soap bubbles and a torch and all this fun jazz. You may only remember that part. You may not remember that it's propane. You may not remember that I was talking to you about gas densities. You may not remember any of that, but I know for a fact that the next time you see me, you're going to be like, oh yeah, I saw that show where you did this. And then I'm going to be able to go, oh yeah, that's a really fun experiment, right? I
I
I
still remember, Jen, a
like,
show that I saw in that theater where the person pretended to put their hand in dry ice, and they smashed it, and it was actually wieners in a glove,
yes,
and I was first of all, I was horrified, then I
yes.
was deceived. And
Yeah.
now I was angry at the presenter because I was like, "You deceived me." But it
Right?
was fantastic. It was
Yeah.
so good.
How long ago was that? Do you remember?
Oh, I'm 44 now, so that must be, like, at least maybe 30 years ago?
Okay.
I was
Okay.
very young, so it
Yeah.
just goes to show,
Because we
you
brought
know?
that experiment back a couple years ago. And it played out just as well. Just as well, right?
It's amazing.
But it's that, and that's it. I think that's another thing that, like, just going back now to what we were saying earlier, is another idea of why creatives are kind of fun in a science center, is because I am sure that the person that created that experiment wasn't just somebody going, because I can't imagine a scientist sitting there going, I really want to teach about dry ice, or I want to teach about liquid nitrogen, and is like, oh man, let's put wieners in a glove and like dunk it in, right? Like, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm like assuming, and I should never assume, but like I can only imagine that it's probably somebody like us that's sitting back there going, let's freak them out, like, right? I can't like,
Well, mission accomplished, whoever
right?
you are. It worked. I still remember it 30 years later, so bravo.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think, as we've just said, like, artists really do play a big role in the learning of science. I'm really curious because you were a blue coat, right? So you were one of those people that people could approach. So I'm curious to know, like, what are the most bizarre questions the public has asked you?
Mm.
Do you have anything memorable to share?
I let me think. I mean, I get a lot of weird questions, like, but again, I am one of those people that never think a question is weird until I get the answer for it. Like, I remember somebody asking me how snails reproduce. To me, I was like, that's not a weird question until I realized that snails are hermaphroditic. So I didn't realize, and then learning about their process of procreating is really interesting. So if ever you get the chance, go to Science North second floor and ask them that. It's really kind of interesting. You can't see my eyebrows right now. I'm kind of making a weird face because I'm like, it's kind of gross. But it's like those types of questions, like, so to say, I don't think there's questions that I've ever had that were weird. I mean, I did have somebody ask me for my phone number, and that I was like, that's totally not scientific, and I'm married, so like, um I don't know, like,
What about, the differences between communicating with an adult, a child, and a senior citizen? Do you use a different approach? What's it like?
so my biggest, for myself, and this goes with everything that I do really, is no matter the audience, I will never treat them like they don't know something, right? And this is something I teach when I'm teaching new people in the Discoveries Theater, or when I'm teaching theater classes, or I'm teaching anything, is never treat your audience like they're stupid. Like, and it's interesting because, again, I remember working with colleagues at Science North, and they were like, this group didn't listen to me, and I was like, well, how are you talking to them? How are you talking to them? And they were like, well, and then doing that child voice, like, well, hello everybody, welcome, and I'm going to get you to sit down, and all like, and I'm like, well, yeah, but you're talking like that. Well, they're 4 years old, how else are you supposed to talk to them? Well, like, they're human,
Mhm.
right? So to me, like, I the I've never had issues with it because I talk straight to people, because to me that's like the most important thing. So, like, regardless of if they're adults or younger, or older, or whatever the age group is, just to never treat them like they don't know something, because you never know. Like, I remember at one point in time making a joke. So we're up on the third floor at Science North. We're looking at one of those uh what do they call the bodies with all the take out parts of like the lungs and all that stuff. Okay,
Oh, the
so
human the human
yeah,
bodies, yeah.
the human body kind of plasticky thing. And I'm sitting there and I'm like explaining to the gentleman the brain, and he's listening to me, and he's like, oh yeah, so what does this do? And I'm like, and then I explain to him, and then he tries to put the piece of the brain into his kind of little casing, right? So like and he misses. And then I make the joke because, again, it's me and I have to make a joke. I'm like, wow, I'm glad you're not my brain surgeon. And then his wife comes and starts laughing, and she's like, actually, he's a neuroscientist. And I went, eh. And
Oh,
and
that's
then he said,
hilarious.
yeah, he's like, you really did good. He's like, I just wanted to see if the scientists at Science North actually knew their stuff. And then I told him that actually, you want to know something even better? I don't have a science degree. Meh. And he was like, that's really impressive for you to know all this about the brain and like be able to dictate it to me. Like, yeah,
So
pretty.
do they train you? So, like, once you get the blue coat job, did they say like, "Okay, here's a manual"?
Not really, right? Because Science North, yes, there is part things like you do have to do certain trainings, like your WMIS, your like all that fun jazz. Because at least for if you're working in the Discovery Theater, and I know a couple other areas have to do that as well. So at Science North, what's really cool is that it's different areas, different sections of the Science Center. So when you get hired on for one particular center, like one particular area. So my home base was the Discovery Theater. So I got to work with all the chemicals and all of that fun stuff. Like so performance and kind of the exhilarating part. I don't want to say that the other parts aren't exhilarating because they really are. Like, I mean, eyeball dissection, let's just say, right? But then there's other areas. So what happens is you kind of get trained to do the shows that you are performing or the workshops that you are performing or what's in your lab space. But then if you're like me and you're nosy and you just want to know absolutely everything that's going on everywhere, you go in on your days off and you kind of like take over areas. That's kind of how it
I
does.
I I have a picture in my head of you crawling in through the vents on your days off and sneaking into the libraries and, like, the other floors.
Oh my gosh, there were days like the third floor would laugh at me because like I wanted to know absolutely everything that I possibly could about every single animal that was in there, right? Like also I'm not a fan of snakes, but since working at Science North, I'm like I absolutely love gray rat snakes. They're like kind of the coolest things on earth. But yeah, it's going in and then understanding like I find the more that you learn about them, the less you become afraid of them, right? Like so learning, for example, the gray rat snake, learning that they eat mice, and I absolutely like mice. They're like right. So learning that they are my friend because they're eating the mice that I don't like made it a lot easier to be like, yeah, I'll hold that. Yeah, whatever. You
It's
know?
funny because it's because of the, I guess, do you call them arachnologists? The spider scientists on Twitter who post a lot of videos of spiders. It's thanks to them that I'm not scared of them anymore.
Right? Yeah. Like
Mhm.
in going downstairs to the second floor and them making me hold the
Oh, the tarantula?
right and just like and going, oh my gosh, that one time it didn't eat me. That's perfect. But it's again, it's like another reason why to me science communication is really important and why getting it down to I'm going to call it neutral terms is for this specific reason. Like the more that I can tell you about stuff, or the more that I can talk to you about what's going on scientifically and make it easy for you to understand, makes it a lot easier. Like, so for example, like I can take today in my class, I was teaching and kids were telling me about how they hate wearing their masks and why is it
Sorry, just a
important.
minute. I'm gonna interrupt you just here because people don't know you're a teacher. We haven't talked about that
Oh
yet.
yeah.
So let's actually tell people that you are a school teacher now.
Yeah,
So,
so I'm teaching
please
in high
continue.
school, and
Yeah.
I'm teaching in so hi, I'm also a teacher. Yeah, so I'm teaching in high school right now. During the pandemic, I've left my job at Science North because there's a serious need in teachers. So I've decided to leave my job at Science North, which I keep telling. I still talk with my supervisor, and I tell her like I miss you. Science North was definitely my dream job, and hopefully, once all of this is said and done, I will be able to go back to Science North. Like that's kind of my goal. But I'm teaching right now during the pandemic because there's a serious need of teachers. And because I do have my teaching certificate, I felt like I should do this for the greater good, kind of like a call to arms. But anyway, I'm teaching in my class, and the students were frustrated because we have to wear masks all the time. It's a 24/7, like, well, that's what they feel like it is, but always wearing masks. And they're like, why do we have to do this? Like, why? What's the point? And then I'm teaching them the Swiss cheese method. And they're like, what do you mean, Swiss cheese method? Have you heard about this? So, because they
No.
were complaining about all of these rules and regulations and now having to wear masks and all of this stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, hear me out. You have to think of it like this. Okay. So Swiss cheese method. So picture right now that first your Swiss cheese has holes in it, okay? So you're putting your first piece of Swiss cheese right first in front of you. Now you're going to breathe. If you breathe through that Swiss cheese or through that mask, there's potential for the virus to go through. Okay. So it's not a high percentage, but there's still a percentage, especially if you're somebody that doesn't understand that your mouth and your nose are connected. Like, so you seem to wear your mask under your nose, that kind of person. So you add another piece of Swiss cheese. So the next piece of Swiss cheese is, say, the social distancing or the physical distancing. So now you have two pieces of Swiss cheese. Well, in Swiss cheese, generally speaking, the holes do not match up. So if you're going to make the virus pass through one piece of Swiss cheese, it'll probably get caught in the second piece of Swiss cheese. So masks, social distancing, but hey, let's add another one. I'm like, at school, we have like you broken down into cohorts. So all the grade 9s are together, all the grade 10s are together, all the grade 11s are together. So that's another piece of Swiss cheese. Now, if you're on the other end of this and I happen to have the virus, the chances of the virus getting through all of those pieces of Swiss cheese are kind of null and void. So it's taking my way of understanding science and having learned, okay, well, yeah, I know that you're going to tell me that masks aren't 100% and you're going to try to trash talk all this, but there is a reason why we're doing it. The reason is the Swiss cheese method. There's not just masks. There's also, like, we have been stopping people from going into stores at a certain number so we can make sure that there's a physical distance between everyone. So, like, in my class today, the student went, oh. And there was this moment that I went, see, like, this whole time from September up until now, this student didn't understand why we had all of these rules. And to break it down like that, where it's like, again, not layman's terms, but it's breaking it down so that they see why we have all these rules, why we have all these pieces of Swiss cheese, makes it a lot more accessible, right? Or a lot more understandable for that teenage brain who thinks they're never going to die. Right?
Okay,
Like,
now I have to ask you, this talent of being able to take a complicated topic and simplify it for let's say, the average person or for a child, is it innate? Is it learned? Or
ooh,
is it both?
I think it's both. I think it's both. And yeah, like I remember as a kid always having to explain things. Like I remember, one, because my dad is French and my mom is English, and I went to a French school, so always having to figure out what things said to be able to explain it to my mom. Like, so I know that for me, having to learn things to then explain them has always happened. To be able to break it down, like simplify it in a way, or to make it a little easier to digest. I'm not sure. I maybe I was born with it. Maybe it's Maybelline. Can I say that? Like,
Sure.
but I'm not sure. I think I think deep down it comes from my own personal, like, not understanding things and going, well, if I can explain it to myself this way and it makes sense, then I can explain it to other people, right? Like, when you're reading a book or you're reading something and you're like, oh, hold on a second, I'm going to write this down and I'm going to, like, make sure that this makes sense to myself, then okay, yeah, that is okay, perfect, and we can move on. But I don't know.
I was just
uh
curious. I figured I'd ask because I also interview a lot of artists and actors, and I always ask them if they feel that it's the artistic talent is innate or learned. So I always, I'm always
yeah.
curious about that question. We just have a few minutes left. I'm just curious, Jen, what do you do for pleasure outside of, learning, teaching science? I know you're a mom, so I'm just wondering, like, who is Jen outside of this whole kind of sphere of work? What do you do for fun?
So I am a baker at home, which, this is weird okay, like, this is ridiculous. I remember talking with my supervisor and her laughing when at the beginning of working at Science North, I would measure things in cups. And she was like, I'm like, oh yeah, so like a cup. And she's like, no. But understanding chemical reactions due to baking made it a lot easier. Like, so when I would explain things, like these are things that people understand. Again, like, right, day-to-day life stuff. Like I'm making cookies and I'm like, I understand what's going on when I'm putting baking soda versus baking powder. Like I understand what I have to put in there to make sure that my cookies don't taste rancid, you know? But it's I think that's when, like, I am a huge fan of baking. I really love running, which right now kind of is crummy because as you come from Sudbury, you probably know what the weather is like here.
Yes,
So
yes.
the roads are bare, but the sidewalks are very icy, and I happen to have this innate fear of like falling and breaking a hip for some reason and lying in the sidewalk until somebody comes and saves me. Like I don't know. So I can't run right now, but that's a lot of the I mean, it's tough because again, a lot of my favorite things are things that I share with people during Jenn Learns Stuff and in science and things like that, right? Like I love to read. I love to like I if I don't have a book in my hand, people are like, "Are you okay? Like are you feeling well?" So, yeah, other than teaching science, learning about life, baking and running, can I say that? Does that
Absolutely. It sounds to me like you're just somebody who lives her passion,
Yeah.
period,
Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
And on that note, Jenn Blanchet, merci d'être
Merci à
venue.
toi.
C'est un grand plaisir. In other words, it's been a huge pleasure having you on the show, and, I think that at some point we should do a video version, because this was actually extremely thrilling on video, guys. You guys really missed out. But
Oh,
anyway,
my
Jenn
hand
Blanchet,
action, my
you're
francophone hand actions.
exactly, exactly. I've repressed mine. So,
Too good.
but thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me. It was so much fun. Let's do it again.
Absolutely.